Hi there, to no one, to me, to you listening. So I did my podcast, I published a podcast last week with Jai Jagdish, and I had wanted to do a video before that came out, kind of recapping everything that, went on in chronological order. And I realized that was sort of a tall task to kind of give some background information on 3HO and Kundalini Yoga and all that. And I also realized, I kind of want to stop talking about it. So I'm not going to talk about that today specifically, but I wanted to do a podcast about inspiration in general. Something that she made me aware of that I hadn't given really much thought, to was the title of my podcast, which is kind of funny. I just sort of consider it like a conversation podcast. And just kind of delving into this word of inspiration and what it means to feel inspired. And, as an artist or as a liver of life, as a human on this planet, I have had some, issues with getting motivated to do things that I feel like I should be doing, music related. And I'm working on that. And in the kind of the process of finding a therapist, thank you, Oshri. That's not my therapist, but he helped me find her. Um, I had this epiphany last week that, you know, doing the mantra music wasn't just, it wasn't just the fact that it was sort of the first time in my life people had been receptive to my music, which felt really great, but it also felt like it had a purpose. Like it was the first time in my life that I felt like I was doing music and it had this like greater purpose, and that gave me reason to do it. It made it fulfilling and it made me feel like I had a purpose. And I know that cults do that in general. Like I listened to Leah Remini talk about her experience with Scientology, and of course, like Jai Jagdish, she was born into that cult, and I was not born into a cult. But I think for years I had been looking for that kind of experience. I really envied my friends who grew up religious, for example. And, as adults, I can see that that wasn't like the rosy experience that it looked like from the outside. But just having kind of a built-in sense of purpose, honestly, like a built-in kind of meaning to life, like that's a big deal. I don't think that I was raised with the sense that there was like a meaning to my life, not because anybody ever told me like there is no meaning or purpose to your life, but it was just like, okay, why are we here? And it was just kind of this question that was like, oh, that's interesting that you're asking that. Don't have an answer. So I think I was kind of searching for something definitely that gave me a sense of purpose. And the first thing that I found, this is so strange and eerie. The first thing that I found was raw food, and I found it through this restaurant, Pure Food and Wine. And what happened to me 2 days ago, but I'm on Netflix, and this movie or this Netflix documentary limited series called Bad Vegan comes up. So if you've seen this, you know what I'm talking about, which is about this raw food restaurant that I went to in 2006 or something like that. That inspired me, we're talking about inspiration, that inspired me to become raw vegan. Now, I am no longer eating a raw vegan diet. However, I did that for about 2.5 years and in my 20s. And this woman, Sarma Melngailis, was basically also had like a very similar experience to mine, except hers seems way worse. But she was, indoctrinated into a cult. It was a cult of one, but it was a cult nonetheless, and was, scammed out of millions and millions of dollars. And that's why that restaurant isn't there anymore. And I just thought, man, that the ties between, all these people, that you don't think as significant, but she was a really big influence for me and in finding meaning. Because I was like, well, maybe there's meaning in, maybe I will feel like I have meaning and purpose if I am eating a completely, I thought like if I'm eating the perfect diet, right? And, it turned out there was no meaning or purpose in that, beyond, feeling good. Which is interesting. Like, is feeling good the purpose of our life? Some people would have us believe so. It doesn't feel enough to me. Like, just feel good. That just doesn't feel, because if that were enough, I guess, then just kind of making music, in my studio or singing to myself, I guess, would have felt like enough. And I've always wanted to share what I do. I'm looking into that more. I think as musicians, it's important to look at why we want to share. Am I sharing because I want people to pat me on the back and tell me how great I am? Am I sharing because I feel like it's going to help people? Am I sharing because I want to make money? And I don't necessarily think any of those things are more commendable than any others, because in the end, you're doing those things because it gives you a sense of purpose. Like, it's selfish anyway, whether you're helping somebody or you're just trying to make money. Like, you're doing that for yourself, right? Even if you're doing something for others, you're like doing that for others because ultimately it makes you feel good, right? It makes you feel good about yourself. And if it doesn't, then maybe it's just draining. But yeah, so I thought that was so crazy. I'm like, I had her cookbook, and I worked at a restaurant in LA called Euphoria Loves Revolution. That he also had like kind of a famous cookbook in the circle, and they used some of her recipes. And there was kind of, it was this very small community of people. And I was talking with my friend a couple days ago, actually, that I just reunited with after like 11 years. We worked at that cafe together in Santa Monica, and it was like an alternate universe. I don't know if I would love to hear from y'all about this. Like, if it was really difficult to understand from that documentary, Bad Vegan, how on earth that would happen to somebody. Like, it just seems so, like, why would you give him that money? That's stupid. You're gorgeous, and he's a total like loser. Like, it was very, from the outside, seemed so obvious, right? But like, it didn't seem that, things don't seem the way that we see them when we're in them. And so I could totally relate to why she would have been in that vulnerable situation, first of all, because that's how I got into a cult. I was in like a vulnerable situation. I actually, like, it's called situationally vulnerable. It's something, a word I was introduced to through this podcast. And she was willing to believe things that maybe most people aren't, but I was too. I was willing to believe that, and I observed that eating raw food, the normal laws of reality didn't apply in certain ways. So, bear with me here. But for example, I had this experience when I was living with a roommate in Santa Monica. I was eating 100% raw vegan diet, okay? Good for me. And because I was living with my roommate and I was seeing her eat like some cooked stuff, I decided to make something in the oven. I don't even remember what it was. So this was kind of a big deal, because it's kind of like, if you're vegan and you decide to eat meat, like, this is in the raw community, like eating something cooked is sort of viewed that way, which is kind of crazy. So I was about to eat cooked food, like bad cooked food. And I turn on the oven. So mind you, I haven't worked an appliance, that gives fire for quite some time, right? And I turn on the oven to like 350 or whatever. And I've never used the oven before, and I didn't realize that you had to light the pilot before operating the oven. So I open it and I'm like, it's not hot here. And she's like, oh yeah, you have to light the pilot. it's been preheating. Well, not really, but I thought it was. The oven had been preheating for like 10 minutes, something like that. So I go in my wonderful innocence, I guess, with my, my little, what are those things called? They're like those they're not matches, but they're like plastic things that create flames. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. You go click and the flame comes out. So I go click, the flame comes out, and this fireball comes out of the oven, right? It like burns off my eyebrows, and I get a really bad burn down here. I think it was a 2nd-degree burn. Don't quote me on that, but it was not the best kind you can get. It was like worse than the best kind you could get. So I did need medical attention. I went to the ER. They gave me some like silver cream, and I hadn't taken medication in a really long time. I was eating really like uber clean. So I did not want to apply this, even though it was painful. I watched this horrible burn that went all the way down my arm. I mean, you can see there's like nothing there, right? I watched this horrible burn just like disappear in the span of a couple days. I was like literally watching it go like, and no scar, nothing. Now, I don't know if that's normal or not. It didn't seem like it was though. And so, that was sort of one of my like reinforcing things about, hey, raw food, gives you superpowers. Like I have the power to heal my body super quickly. And in a sense, I sort of do believe that. Like if you're eating, a very clean diet, I don't eat anywhere near that clean now, but like still very clean. Then I feel like, there are certain things that you just don't have to deal with that maybe everyday people do. And they think that they're normal based on, the Cheeto diet that they're on. But you don't, because, your system works quite immaculately. And in that instance, also I was in my 20s, my system worked pretty well. So that was one example. But I just remember things like that, people would tell you like, you don't have to deal with, some of the things that you have to deal with in old age. That's not going to happen to you because you take this or you don't eat this or, whatever. So there was kind of this idea that like normal problems don't happen to people in that thing. So I could see that it's not a huge stretch for someone to believe that like spiritually speaking, and I know this wasn't food related, that she could be in the presence of somebody that could, make her and her dog immortal. If you haven't seen the Bad Vegan documentary, then the guy that she's with, that she ends up marrying, convinces her that he's like, this basically kind of a deity, and that, he can bring her into the fold, but she just has to keep giving him money. So really, really eerie, but it did make me think about like the ways that we can be manipulated. It made me think about how trusting she must have been, and my heart goes out to her because, I'm a trusting person too. So I feel like, we wouldn't necessarily have done all the same things, but you don't know unless you've been in those circumstances what you would do. So it's definitely hard to judge. But so anyway, I kind of went from like that this like cult of believing that like no human problems were relevant to me because of the diet that I ate, to, no human problems are relevant to me because of the kriyas that I do. So it wasn't a far stretch to go from that to the, the cult of 3HO and Kundalini yoga, honestly. Because there seemed to be a remedy for everything. And I was like, well, I kind of want to eat pasta. So maybe if I just eat pasta but do the kriya, it'll have like the same effect. And interestingly enough, I never found that the kriyas worked as well as just eating the raw food. But the raw food was like really hard socially. So I stopped doing that, and I started eating the mung beans and rice and all that. But yeah, this isn't a podcast about diet, but finding purpose. Finding purpose after you've been in a cult is it's just been like a crazy experience. I don't know, especially in the midst, I guess, of, everything fell down right before COVID. So it's like, even like a semblance of purpose that I had that was maybe based in like, I don't know, going places or being allowed to see people or things like that was also taken away. So my sense of, and this is a realization like I said, I've just had really recently. My sense of having a purpose, like on earth, forget my music, but also in my music has really, I've really felt that void. Um, and that's hard. It's really hard. I'm I'm guessing more people than just me can kind of relate to that because, there was a reason for my life. There was a reason to do specific practices. There was a reason to be, drinking specific tinctures and teas, and there was a reason to be eating a specific way, and there was a reason to show up somewhere on a Sunday, and there was a reason to go somewhere twice a year and gather in community, and there was a reason to do this strange, white tantric yogic practice. It felt like there was purpose in it. And finding out that, like, it's just sort of the, you know, machinations of a sociopath, and that you've found meaning in something that's actually quite meaningless is really heartbreaking. So I was telling my brother, he was visiting the other day, and I was telling him because we were making like he bought a pineapple that was underripe, and so he wanted to do something with it. So he wanted to make a pineapple upside down cake. So we were on the hunt for all the pineapple upside down cake ingredients, and he had to buy pineapple juice. And I remembered there was some atomic explosion that happened, I think in Russia, like in 2011, that happened during the recording of my first CD with Satdarshan, the music within. And I remember that people were sharing, like, we recorded that atomic radiation meditation. I'm rolling my eyes if you can't see. It's like, Jesus, if you've been exposed to radiation, don't do a fucking meditation. Oh my God. I mean, feel free to meditate, but like, get some medical attention. But yeah, the like drink that you were supposed to drink was pineapple juice. I think it was like a pineapple and tomato juice mixture. I can't remember. Who cares? But I was telling my brother, sort of like reminiscing about, like, oh yeah, like I used to think that you could drink pineapple juice and that would, cure you from radiation poisoning or exposure to an atomic blast. And he was like kind of sarcastically like, yeah, that sounds real legit. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it doesn't, but man, in the context of like where I was and who I was around, it did seem legit because so many people were believing it, like if you're in a culture and everybody around you is legitimizing the things by believing in them and practicing them and talking about them as if they're truth, even something as seriously ludicrous as pineapple juice cures, cures exposure to an atomic blast. Gee, if only the people in Hiroshima knew about pineapple juice. I mean, it's like, it's cruel, right? I don't know. It seemed possible. That's the only thing I can say. It's like, I think it's also, and this is not, I don't think, a bad thing, but I think it's good to be skeptical of mainstream, medical science. I think that there is some validity in questioning some things. For example, like I had, a thyroid issue. That's how I got into yoga in the first place, not Kundalini yoga, but just like vinyasa yoga. I was told I'd have to take thyroid hormones for the rest of my life. And I was like, well, that sucks. I don't want to do that. So, I found somebody who was like, yeah, if you do yoga and you blah, blah, blah. I don't know if that was, it's like, you, I don't, blah, blah, blah. If she showed me this exercise where you like move your tongue around your teeth kind of in a circle, stimulates the thyroid gland. There were a few, like, if you do, plow pose and things like that, it's supposed to stimulate the thyroid gland. I think later on I discovered that like eating wheat and to a certain extent, dairy, especially like in milk, caused inflammation that really affected my thyroid health. So now I feel fine. I don't take thyroid medicine, but I think that thing kind of got me skeptical of maybe Western medicine doesn't know everything. Maybe there's some validity, but that just sort of opens up this like Pandora's box of, well, then anything is possible, which is also not the case. So I think we can kind of go too far in either extreme. It's like, the only thing I trust is Western medicine, where Western medicine doesn't have a great track record with chronic illness and actually like solving things as opposed to sort of masking them. Western medicine is awesome for emergency situations. You definitely want that, ER care, or like the antibiotic when you've gotten a horrible infection all of a sudden, and you're about to die. Like, definitely get me some Western medicine. But you're suffering from anxiety, that they don't have the answer. They don't have a good one anyway, in my estimation. Or you're suffering from, digestive issues or things like that, you probably need something different. You probably need a dietary change. You probably need, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so I can't speculate, but it's those sorts of things I feel like that get people into crystals or into vaginal steaming, and it's like you're searching for answers where Western medicine isn't providing them. So I think that that's valid, but I just think that sometimes it can kind of go in the direction, and I already said this, of like believing just anything, which is also not so. It's also not positive. So I think definitely the hugest takeaway for me was like, having an open mind is good. Having an open heart is good, but also trusting your gut when something sounds fishy. That's not a limiting belief, as people would say. It's like when something sounds like bullshit. Trust yourself that that's not right for you. It might be right for somebody else, but it's just not right for you, right? So I think tuning that skill is something that will continue to work on, and in my pursuit of meaning, because part of the thing in finding purpose is that you have to also find something to believe in. So no matter what we're doing, it's like I'm doing this podcast because somebody canceled, and hopefully I'll get to post her episode next week when I have it. But she anyway, I won't talk about her because I haven't met her yet, so I won't get into that. But I think we will be having a little bit of discussion about purpose and creativity and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, I do struggle to find kind of meaning, specifically, I think, generally in life, as I said, but specifically in music, specifically in why, what's the point? I was talking to my friend the other day, and I was like, there's so many good singers. Like, there's so many great singers. I'm not competitive by nature, and I don't really like feel the need to assert my my voice over the crowd, and I'm not really into vocal gymnastics and like impressing people, not that like that there's anything wrong with that. I think that that's really cool. There are people that are like awesome, like they're like on, my idioms are not so great, but like on a dime, I think that's the expression, can just sort of like whip out, like this really impressive belt or something, or, they'll do that. And that feels really good to them, and power to them. That's awesome. But I always, when people would ask me when I was a kid, like, "Oh, so I hear you sing something for me." And my expression, my like instinct would be just to sort of like shrink, almost like this, like, I don't want to have to prove anything to you. Like, my voice is for me, it's not for you. So that's been interesting, I think, in my musical career, is like finding that balance where I feel that I want to be singing for people because I feel like it's an offering, but not as like a way of proving my worth. And I wonder if that's something that other musicians are aware of or struggle with. I don't think I've ever had a conversation um, with somebody about, I mean, I sort of with my friend Andy the other day, um, but like this struggle has been real for me. I will not lie. Like, when I was doing my singer-songwriter thing before doing the mantra music, the reason I started doing mantra music is that I just stopped singing. I stopped singing my songs because I just felt like they were making me feel bad. And it's interesting, I keep coming back to like the feeling good, feeling bad. So I think there's something in there. I think this is part of our purpose. But um, yeah, but so I stopped actually singing entirely. And I just kind of intuitively knew like I couldn't keep using my music as a vehicle for public therapy, I guess would be the best explanation of it. Like, they were so raw, and the songs, they were so raw and personal, and it just sort of felt like, I don't know, like walking on stage and just undressing in front of everybody. It was too much. And I think also I didn't realize how sensitive I was to energy afterwards. So maybe if I had been able to, create a buffer for myself after performing, as opposed to like going and talking to people, maybe that also would have helped me. But well, for whatever reason, I couldn't sustain that and stopped singing. And then I started meeting kirtan artists in Santa Monica, because there was quite a big scene there. And that seemed purposeful. Like, everybody that sang, I sang with CC White in particular. There was purpose. Like, she was getting people involved. She was making them feel joyful. She was bringing something to them that they actually wanted and needed, which felt really different than trying to convince somebody, by performing, that you were worth listening to. It was a very different dynamic in the kirtan scene than it was in the singer-songwriter scene, because I would show up as a singer-songwriter and I would be like, "I hope you like me," not saying that, but like the energy of that. But you show up in kirtan, and nobody even has to know who you are. They know what kind of experience they're likely to get. So that was really cool. Like, people already kind of implicitly trusted that they were going to have a great time, and that's a really great place to start from when you're performing, um, as opposed to the singer-songwriter thing that I was dealing with. Once you start to get notoriety as a singer-songwriter, obviously people show up and they expect to have a good time, and they expect to like your music. But that time when you are playing your new songs and you're unknown, and all that, it does sort of feel like you're trying to convince people of your worth, and that is something that I really admire in other people that have been successful in this genre, because that's no easy feat, I guess. And maybe possibly it's just that they're not even thinking of that. It's just like, this is fun and I keep doing it, and I don't know. It's not my makeup, I guess, but in some ways even with like the Kundalini yoga stuff, I was talking with Guru Nishan, and I was like, I kind of wish, I mean, I don't because I like myself, but I kind of wish sometimes that I could just be like, oh, that was bad. All right, let's move on. Let's keep doing the creative or whatever. Like the way some people have um, kind of registered all this stuff so differently from the way I have and the way she has. And Guru Nishan does that. Uncomfortable Conversations, The Untold Stories of 3HO, I think is the title podcast, which is really great. It's pretty heavy, really great. Like, yeah. so, so yeah, I mean, I guess that's, it's like the burden of the overthinker, I suppose, is that I do think about purpose and I do think about meaning a lot. And if something doesn't feel meaningful, or if it doesn't seem like I have a purpose in what I'm doing, then it's kind of deflating. And I haven't regained that, to be honest, with my compositions of late, even though I really love them and I'm excited to write them when I sit down. And who knows, maybe it's just that, I moved and I don't have a community to sing to anymore. And we've been isolated for a couple of years now. We're all just sort of starting to emerge from the lockdown energy. And, maybe I just don't have purpose in it because I'm not singing it for people. That's possible. So time will tell. Time will tell how this all plays out. But anyway, I thought I would just share that when I was talking to Andy about it. Andy Flax, who's a really beautiful soul and musician in her own right. She texted me and was like, you should do a podcast about the difficulty in finding purpose after leaving a cult. And I think she's actually talking about like a whole podcast series. I probably won't do that because I don't want to belabor the cult thing for the rest of my life. But it is a thing. It did happen. I am emerging from it continually every day, shedding layers of it still. I've come a long way. I've come a really long way from going to the grocery store without my turban and hoping that that I don't run into anybody, right? Or like buying, I don't know, posting photos of me eating fish or something on on Facebook, like just the fear of coloring outside of the lines and being shunned for it. And I think it wasn't even so much the shunning of other people, but like the way that I felt about it because of the indoctrination that I had done to myself, which is a very interesting tactic of the cult leader, I learned, where, you don't even have to convince people of things anymore because you've done it so many times and through so many different people that people now police themselves. It's a very interesting phenomenon. So I was definitely policing myself, and I think that kept me from doing things that I was inspired to do for a while. Thankfully, not that long, but things that my partner, who's never been in a cult, is kind of quizzical about me when I told him that like it was a really big deal for me to cut my hair, even though it was like that much, because I hadn't in 8 years. He was like people would judge you for cutting your hair. That's like it's like to him it's like people judging you for using a fork. Like that's everybody does that, don't they? Well, no. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride. Life is an interesting ride. And I suppose that's all I have to say about that. So for this one in particular, I'm really excited to hear back from people. I don't know how many people are aware of the fact that I have a YouTube channel now devoted to my podcast, which is called Inspired Artist Podcast. Super creative on YouTube. So you can check out the videos that I have there. So um, uh, if you want to see what's going on, not just this episode, but every episode that I've done pretty much gets put up as a video. So you can see the conversation, not just listen to it. Yeah, so I think that's it. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will be interviewing, I think her name is pronounced Amy Gaston, but we will we will get back to you on that, who seems like a really amazingly acclaimed activist and singer that I will be talking to next week. So stay tuned for that, and I will catch you in the next episode. All right, bye.